I think that fate and future are separate things in that, you can, like, there is a system of oppression that definitely determines the future and the opportunities and the experiences that people have and can make it a lot more difficult for those people to reach the same level as people who are, like, do not have to struggle through those issues. But I think with the right support in place, it doesn't have to be their fate completely determined. I think that with support and with the help that, like, we're learning in this class, for example, that people can reach that same level and their fate isn't entirely determined just by this system of oppression that is in place. Systems that Rodriguez experiences, like the classes and his community, those really can raise people up, and that can determine their fate too. And it doesn't have to be just the systems of oppression that do that. And I think also the power of the individual to overcome these things, because saying that the individual isn't strong enough to overcome these systems of oppression, it can be harmful to that person's own will to go farther and achieve more in their life. So yeah, I think that while there are definitely systems of oppression, they don't have to be eternal and all deciding.
I personally believe that I guess there is a systematic nature of depression. Like, it exists, there's a system, and it oppresses certain people over others. However, it does not 100% determine someone's fate. That implies the idea of determinism, which is in turn completely against the ideals of this project and of this class, to empower and to kind of give people a perspective on these issues. What that actually does is the opposite. What it does is the idea that determinism is true. What it does is it shows people, oh, there's nothing you can do about it. Your fate is determined. There's no right or wrong. There's no way to give yourself motivation to change your life or to act and empower yourself and be a better person, because you can't. If determinism is true, if it's true that your life is determined by the system that overrules you, then there's no reason to act out. There's no reason to act against the oppression, because it determines you completely. So there's no reason to. So that's exactly the opposite of what the class is for. The exact opposite of what this assignment is for. We need to empower people and make them understand that there is a possibility for them to change, and that this oppression that they maybe feel is not deterministic. It's not overpowering. It's not overbearing. It is encroaching on your life necessarily, but it's not overpowerful. It's not all powerful, and you can change yourself despite it.
Yes, criminality is a class issue, and here is why. That's a letter. Okay. Because it is more likely that you will commit a crime if you need to, or if your motivations are something coming from necessity. And so, if you have less, as do people in lower classes, then you're more likely to commit a crime out of necessity. If you have a need that's not being fulfilled, and those are more frequent in the lower classes. So for example, if you are not making enough money to feed your children, for example, it would be more of a necessity to commit a crime based on fulfilling that need if you can't make those ends meet. So also, it's more common in the lower classes that you'd be involved in some sort of group or activity that promotes criminality, like a gang, for example. So criminality would be more common in lower classes, where that is less of a big deal, more kind of written into life. Like, some people are born into gangs or born into those groups because of where they are in life and because of whatever class they're in.
I believe so. I took this class last year, and after all the books we've read and after all of the stories we've heard, as well as just thinking about the system of government we have and the kind of social structure we have, criminality tends to be a class issue. People in lower classes are kind of driven because they don't have the same needs that are met. They're driven to do more criminal things because of society and the way they're put in as a class, as lower class people. So I think in terms of gangs, the gangs are mainly filled with people from the lower class. There isn't anybody from middle or upper classes in gangs because they have more of their needs met. They're, like, in society, more, like, they're safer. They're a lot safer. And gangs are kind of this like, group that is very compelling to people that don't have all their needs or, like, safety nets met. So generally, people of different races, like, that aren't the majority race, which is white, are in gangs. People in lower classes are filled with people of Hispanic backgrounds and of African American backgrounds, and so black kids and Hispanic kids are like the majority of what is in gangs, like 99% of who are in gangs, because they fill 99% of the lower class. And I feel that is because it's like the lower class is this thing that was built off of old prejudice and still even current prejudices that the majority race had against minority races in the 50s and 60s and way earlier as well. It's built off of the slave system we had. It's built off of the James Crow laws. It's Jim Crow laws, right? It's built off of just lots and lots of prejudice that we've built up over the years, and that's starting to go away, but it's not going away fast enough for criminality to stop becoming a class issue.
It is a two-class system in our country. Johnny Cochran said, "The color of justice is green, and you're innocent until you run out of money," which kind of summarizes our judicial system in this country. And it's not really a justice system, it's more of a legal system. So as long as you have money, you can actually afford the best and brightest lawyers. One of my best examples is the Duke lacrosse team. They were actually charged with raping two strippers, and they could afford the best and the brightest attorneys in the country. And one of the things that they found out was that the DA was actually kind of framing them and bringing along a lot of evidence that wasn't there. And they were able to show a lot of problems with the case, and eventually the DA was disbarred and actually put in prison. But what I always thought was never brought up was, how many people did he actually, that didn't have the means that the Duke lacrosse team had, actually go to jail taking a plea bargain that it never went to trial, and there was never really the evidence, and we never talked about or they even investigated those cases. And so that's actually disturbing, especially when we look at the Justice Project, which has actually exonerated a great number of people using DNA technology from past rape convictions and even murder convictions. And what even disturbs me more is not just that they've been wrongly convicted, that they've spent decades of their formative years in prison, but how many people have actually been put to death. This is another real big concern of mine. So the justice system is really a legal system. And one of the ways that we're always trying to achieve equality in our country, and the only way we're ever going to achieve equality in our country is to have justice. That's the only way equality will ever be achieved. And that's pretty much the long and the short. So thank you very much.
I do think criminality is a class issue in America, but I don't think that it should be worded as think, because it's not an opinion. It's not what I think, it's a fact. So I was just looking at some data on it. It's what I expected, but I wanted to check my facts. And so class is tied to race, and if you look at the statistics, statistically there are more Black and Latino white males incarcerated than, or Black and Latino males incarcerated than white males. So, by a large margin. Another thing that it made me think about is the policy, and not the policy, but the term was coined in around the 1960s. The policy was based on drawing a red line on a map where banks would offer home loans and where they wouldn't. So it became known as redlining, and where the banks wouldn't offer home loans was often racially motivated. They wouldn't offer loans to areas that were predominantly races or filled with people of a certain race. So it made it impossible for those people to then buy and own homes, which then automatically put them in a different social class. And then the effects of that are very wide-reaching. So, and I think that that's then linked to the current criminality that we were just talking about. So criminality or incarceration, whatever we want to call that. So, yes.
Yes, I do think criminality is a class issue in America. This is something that I'm not an expert on, and I am a data-driven person, so it's uncomfortable for me to talk about something that I don't have a lot of data on. I think this is something that we see a lot in the media, and we know the media distorts our perception of facts, but it's certainly true in the United States that there has been a growing disparity between the wealthy and the not wealthy over the last generation. It's been very disheartening to see it as someone who grew up in the 60s, and that disparity between people who have resources and people who don't have resources potentially is a reason that people who don't have a way to support their family, to support themselves, who have to work multiple jobs, low-wage jobs, to try to support themselves, may be drawn into more lucrative activities that may be criminal. So I would say it is my impression that the limited opportunities for people who have little resources and because of where they live, their resources in terms of education, family resources, that they may be drawn into activities that they may be exposed to that may be criminal in order to support themselves and their family.
Well, I would say that Marx said that all other things being equal, economy, the economy will be determinative, and I believe that's true. But you're asking about criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, of course, criminals, criminality as you call it, is a class issue. Our capitalism is based on criminality. The criminal class are the monopoly capitalists themselves. That's the criminal class. Now,
Okay.
if you look at law and the enforcement of law by the police and etc., virtually all of our statutory law is about the holy right of private property. Meaning that if you own property, you're not supposed to be able to be deprived of it without appropriate action of law. And most of our law is about making sure that people who steal property are punished. That's most of the law. Not all of it, but most of it. So if you rob a 7-Eleven and you get caught, get prosecuted, sent to jail, etc. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what if you don't own anything except your labor power? Are you then protected by the law? When you deprive people of life and liberty and the ability to have a reasonable existence for themselves and their family, they have a tendency to do bad things. People don't starve quietly.
Yeah.
For example, I'm old enough to remember the Civil Rights Movement. I'm sure you're probably aware that virtually all of the marches were illegal.
Yeah.
Right? And this is why they often were beaten up. Same thing is true of the labor movement in the United States. Much of what was done against the strikes was supported by the law.
Yeah.
Were those folks criminals? Well, in the eyes of the law, yes, they were criminals. When Martin Luther King wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail, he was in jail for violating the law. Was he a criminal? Well,
the law, yeah.
certainly according to J. Edgar Hoover, he was a criminal. All right? Eugene Debs, who ran for the presidency of the United States from prison, socialist candidate. Was he a criminal? Well, according to the law, he was a criminal. The suffragettes who marched for equal votes for women, were they criminals? In many cases, yes, they were. Is that a class issue? Yeah, when you oppress people, they rise up, and they demonstrate, and they organize, and they fight back. Does that make them criminals? Yeah, criminals, but as far as I'm concerned, they're doing the right thing. The Black Panthers in Oakland, with their lunch programs and their educational programs, and them following the police around with cameras. Did that make them criminals? No, but they were treated like criminals. And so that's why many of them were killed. So is criminality a class issue? Absolutely. Who are the systematic criminals? The monopoly capitalists. Are there other criminals based on their class? Absolutely. Most of the time, people rising up to try to fight back. Not all the time. Are there murderers? Are there rapists? Are there people who are horrible people? Yes. Yes, they are. There are. Are there people who are psychologically unstable, who do terrible things? Absolutely. Are there drug addicts? Are there psychopaths that are criminals? Absolutely. Do I consider those a class issue? Those folks can come from any group. Do we need enforcement to take care of that? Absolutely. But the big crime, the one that's destroying the planet, capitalism, that's not being prosecuted. That's the big crime.
Yes, I believe criminality is a class issue in America. Not only is it directly related to race, but it's also related to, obviously, class. It's a part of the reason that criminality is so connected to what class you are is the fact that the idea behind it, the reason that the inequality exists is because of the inherent, the unequal system that exists. So the fact that the bourgeoisie class is paid more capital for their labor value, what that does is then inherently, if they are paid more capital for their labor value, the proletariat, the lower classes, are paid less for their labor value. Instead of being paid what you're worth, you're paid what the bourgeoisie think you're worth, which is almost nothing. They try to pay you the least amount they can. Now, what that does is then obviously, as a natural person, you would protest that as a proletariat. That being, if you are the non-ruling class and you are protesting against policies or issues that face you, you are instantly criminalized.
Criminality is a class issue in America because a lot of the time in America, our society fails to protect a lot of the people who are more disadvantaged, and it disenfranchises them from the system. They don't have the same opportunities, but they don't have also the same, protection from the police, from just other forces that some members of society have. And I think that a lot of the time causes them to resort to criminality, not as a means of terrorism or trying to hurt other people, but as a means to survive. And I think that's a really important part of what Rodriguez says in his memoir, is that these people are criminals of want, not criminals of hurtfulness or criminals of anger. They're just trying to survive, and I think that a lot of that comes from their basic needs not being met. So in America, at least, our society does not protect the people that need the protection the most.